Hello, everyone. Once again, it is story time with Teacher Cole. For those who don't know me, I am your host, Teacher Cole, and the owner of Teacher Cole's English Corner. It is an online tutoring company with many highly educated teachers ready and willing to teach you English online. We teach English to children and adults in many unique ways, including current events, cultural studies, social studies, science, literature, and traditional lessons as well. But today is another story time with Teacher Cole. And today we are going to follow along a very forgetful character who just can't seem to remember anything. His name is Mr. Forgetful. So let's get started today, shall we? Mr. Forgetful by Roger Hargreaves. It was one of those beautiful summer mornings that everybody liked to see. In Forget-me-not Cottage, the owner was fast asleep. Mr. Forgetful. He was having a dream. Then the sun streaming through the windows woke up Mr. Forgetful. Oh, he yawned and stretched his arms and tried to remember what he had been dreaming about. But of course, he couldn't because Mr. Forgetful can't remember anything. Anything at all. Ever. Mr. Forgetful got out of bed and went to wash his face. But he'd forgotten where the bathroom was in his house. And do you know what he did? He walked into the wardrobe, the closet. Silly me, he giggled to himself. Eventually, of course, Mr. Forgetful found his bathroom and washed his face. He even remembered to clean his teeth. Then he went downstairs to make himself some breakfast. He toasted some bread, but of course he forgot about it and it was burnt. He boiled himself an egg, but of course he forgot about it and it was hard boiled. Mr. Forgetful has burnt toast and hard boiled eggs for breakfast every day. Do you forget things sometimes? I know I do. It was such a lovely day. Mr. Forgetful decided to walk down to the village to buy a stamp for a letter he'd written 3 weeks ago, but had forgotten to post. He'd forgotten to mail it. Off he set. And did he remember to shut the door of Forget-me-not Cottage behind him? Of course he didn't. Good morning, Mr. Forgetful, said Mrs. Parcel in the village post office. What can I do for you this fine morning? I'd like uh, I've forgotten, he said. A stamp? Suggested Mrs. Parcel, looking at the letter Mr. Forgetful was carrying. Yes, A stamp! That's what it was I was trying to remember not to forget, said Mr. Forgetful. Mrs. Parcel smiled. She was used to Mr. Forgetful. Mr. Forgetful had some more shopping to do, but he could. But could he remember what it was he was supposed to remember, not to forget, to shop for? Of course he couldn't. So he decided to go home. On his way, he met the village policeman going the other way. Morning, Mr. Forgetful, said the policeman. Will you give Farmer Fields a message from me on your way home, please? Farmer Fields had a farm not very far from Forget-me-not Cottage. Tell him there's a sheep loose in the lane, said the policeman. Do you think Mr. Forgetful will remember to tell Farmer Fields the message? Let's see. Poor Mr. Forgetful. He'd never had a message to remember in his life before. There's a sheep loose in the lane, he said to himself, trying to remember the message as he hurried along. There's a sheep loose in the lane. 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 Mr. Forgetful repeated the message over and over to himself. There's a sheep loose in the lane. Eventually, he arrived at the farm and found Farmer Fields. Mr. Fields, he said, there's a goose loose in the lane. No, that's not right. There's a goose asleep in the rain. Farmer Fields couldn't believe his ears. Is that the right message? There's a goose asleep in the rain? Repeated Farmer Fields slowly. But I don't have any geese. And anyway, it isn't raining. Are you sure that was the message? Poor Mr. Forgetful. He'd got it all wrong, and he couldn't remember how to get it all right. He simply couldn't remember at all. So off he went home. Poor Mr. Forgetful. Do you remember the message? Was it there's a goose asleep in the rain? Or there's a goose in the lane? Or is it something else? How does Mr. Forgetful feel now? Mr. Forgetful walked away from Farmer Fields' farm, feeling very sorry for himself. I wish I could remember things, he thought. He was so busy feeling sorry for himself that he didn't see that there was a sheep loose in the lane. He bumped into it and fell over. Bother, said Mr. Forgetful. Bah, said the sheep. How silly letting a sheep loose in the lane, thought Mr. Forgetful. And then he remembered the message. He jumped up and ran back along the lane to the farmer as fast as he could. Mr. Fields, Mr. Fields, he called as he ran into the farmyard. Mr. Fields, there's a goose asleep in the rain. He'd forgotten again. Mr. Fields scratched his head. Come with me, come on, cried Mr. Forgetful, and pulled Farmer Fields back along the lane until they came to the sheep that was loose. There it is, cried Mr. Forgetful, pointing. A goose! And then he stopped. Oh dear, he said. That's not a goose, is it? That's a sheep! And he blushed. I think, smiled Farmer Fields, that you're the goose. And he chuckled. Mr. Forgetful giggled. And Farmer Fields laughed. And even the sheep started to laugh. It was so funny. Later that day, Mr. Forgetful sat down in his favorite armchair in Forget-me-not Cottage to think about what a funny day it had been. But do you know something? He tried and tried, but try as he would, he simply couldn't remember anything that had happened. Oh, Mr. Forgetful. Well, this is the end of our story again today. What did you think about Mr. Forgetful? He forgets an awful lot, doesn't he? Have you ever forgotten anything? What do you do to remember the things you have forgotten? Well, I look forward to seeing you next week for a new story. As always, you're welcome to join our Facebook group, Teacher Cole's English Corner. And I hope everybody had a wonderful and interesting holiday season. I'll see you guys next week. Goodbye.